Okay.
Good morning. I am Pauline Laermans. I work for the University College in Ghent, Belgium, where I do research on the phasing out of off-label antipsychotic use in adults with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior. But today I want to tell you a little bit more about the development of the Belgian guideline for the use of off-label psychotropic drugs in adults with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior. What to expect? I will start with a brief outline of the background of the study. Then we will move on to the aim of the study. Next, I will explain the use methodology, moving on to the results, and finally to the conclusion and discussion. To start, people with intellectual disabilities have an increased fragility to mental health problems. These problems are reported to occur in 30 to 50% of people with intellectual disabilities, as compared to 10% in persons without intellectual disabilities. There are generally two reasons for prescribing psychotropic drugs. The first one is the presence or suspicion of a mental disorder. And the second one, the presence of challenging behavior such as aggression, self-injurious behavior, agitation, sexually unacceptable behavior. Psychotropics are often administered to address challenging behavior without a proper indication in absence of an underlying psychiatric disorder, the so-called off-label prescribing. Some data, 20 to 45% of the adults with intellectual disabilities take psychotropics, and 14 to 30% of these adults use psychotropic drugs for challenging behavior in the absence of a diagnosis or a psychiatric disorder. As we know, in the field of intellectual disability care, the concept of quality of life, together with the supports paradigm, are increasingly being used. But despite this increased use, there are still many restrictive practices in the treatment of people with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior. Moreover, side effects are common, and the effectiveness of psychotropic drugs for the treatment of challenging behavior has not been proven. In this regard, the quality of life framework is a relevant perspective for operationalizing intended outcomes in the support of people with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior. Finally, in our literature review, we noted that the subject of quality of life does not always seem to be addressed or explicitly addressed in the international evidence-based guidelines. Oh. The aim of our study was to develop a guideline with recommendations for the responsible prescription aligned with the quality of life perspective of off-label psychotropic drugs for adults with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior based on the literature and clinical practice. In this context, no statements are made about concrete doses and evaluation schedules. The objective was to establish principles for careful prescribing behavior. The study was conducted in cooperation with and under the supervision of the Superior Health Council in Belgium. To develop the guideline, an ad hoc scientific steering committee with 13 experts was established. The statements for the first round of the Delphi study were prepared based on literature review and experts' opinions. During the literature review, specific attention was paid to the occurrence of the keyword quality of life. By coding, teaming, refine, and structuring evidence-based existing guidelines, the Scientific Steering Committee made a list with statements for the first round of the Delphi study. A specific Delphi procedure was conducted to achieve consensus among experts from the ID working field about guideline recommendations. The Delphi group participants were selected on the basis of their long-standing clinical expertise with a target group of people with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior. 58 experts were contacted, 27 Dutch-speaking and 12 French-speaking Belgian experts, and 19 international experts from the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. Of the 58 experts who were approached, 36 agreed to participate in the first round of the Delphi study. In the successive Delphi rounds, only participants who completed the statements in the first round were sent the adapted statements for the next round. The experts were asked to give their opinion on 33 statements. For each statement, respondents were asked to what extent they agreed with the statements using a 5-point Likert scale ranging from totally disagree to totally agree. And they also could provide comments. The statements for which no consensus was reached were reformulated based on the comments provided and were resubmitted to the experts in the next round. In consultation with the Scientific Steering Committee, the statements were considered accepted when at least 70% of the participants agreed, and the median was equal to or higher than 4, with an interquartile range of no more than 1. The statements for which more than 70% of the participants gave a score of 1 or 2, with a median less than 2 and an interquartile range less than 1 were rejected. After the first round, the expert agreed on 21 of the 33 statements. The remaining 12 statements were reformulated based on the feedback from the experts. After round 2, there was consensus on 4 of the 12 remaining statements. Then after the third round, 2 more statements were approved and 6 statements did not reach consensus. 5 statements were reformulated for the last round. And 1 statement was judged to be too controversial. The Scientific Steering Committee decided to remove the statement because consensus could not be reached even after several adjustments. Finally, consensus could not be reached on 3 other statements. So those 3 statements were deleted after the first round based on a lack of agreement for 2 statements or too many outliers for 1 statement. The Delphi procedure led to a high level of agreement on the statements. Consensus was found for 88% or 29 of the 33 proposed statements. The experts shared opinions on the statements related to the importance of non-pharmaceutical treatments, comprehensive diagnostics, and multidisciplinary treatment. The final guideline contains principle and guideline recommendations. A distinction between the two was intentionally made. Principles deal with general statements that should be taken into account in the off-label prescribing of psychotropics to adults with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior, and the guideline recommendations contain concrete prescriptions and checklists. Disagreement was found for the statements concerning freedom-restricting measures, the treatment plan, the evaluation of the treatment plan, and the informed consent. In our understanding, the underlying disagreements can be divided into ethical, theoretical, practical, and policy-related aspects. To complete the guideline of off-label psychotropic drugs for adults with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior, the Scientific Steering Committee developed a flow chart as an overview for the assessment and treatment of challenging behavior based on the feedback of the respondents. And the flow chart highlights the cyclical nature of prescribing and the link with quality of life. The study used a Delphi method to develop a guideline from the perspective of the concept of quality of life for prescribing off-label psychotropic drugs to people with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior. The principles and guideline recommendations were not tested separately for quality of life, but quality of life was considered holistically in the development of the entire guideline. Experts agree that treatment with off-label psychotropic drugs should never be a first choice. The statements without consensus require further attention in close cooperation between experts, practitioners, policymakers, and other stakeholders, including clients and their families. Organizing focus groups would be a useful and relevant pathway to discuss these items. Finally, it is recommended to monitor and revise the principles and guideline recommendations on a regular basis. Future research could focus on the effectiveness, implementation, and feasibility of the guideline on psychotropic medication use, as well as on the impact of the guideline on a patient's quality of life. Furthermore, we have to remain aware that quality of life is difficult to measure. Despite our focus on quality of life during this study, we cannot make any predictions about the increase of quality of life when following the developed guideline. In this study, the focus was to improve quality of life at an individual level. A relevant follow-up study could be to operationalize the guideline in terms of quality of life by designing an instrument that links quality of life and medication use in adults with intellectual disabilities. A first step for this could be the pilot study, which we are currently doing in Belgium. In the study, the effects of applying the developed guideline in adults with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior will be investigated, and the process of phasing out the medication will be described in detail. An impact evaluation will identify the effects of the phasing out on quality of life, global functioning, challenging behavior, and the side effects. One final note, the developed guideline focuses on adults with intellectual disabilities. Psychotropics are also frequently described, often off-label and long-term, to children and adolescents with intellectual disabilities and challenging behavior. Therefore, it is recommended to set up a similar study for this target group too. Okay, I try to present the Belgian guideline development as briefly as possible. I want to thank you for your attention. For those who are interested, the full guideline can be found by using the link or the QR code. Now, I don't know if there are any questions and if we still have time for questions. So.